Jesus answered and said unto him, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Now, when anybody reads this, the question that might come in your mind is, should a person die and be born again to see the kingdom of God, or to enter the kingdom of God, or to experience the kingdom of God? Now, the same apprehension or doubt was there in the minds of people at that time when Jesus was saying this to a small group of people. One person asked him, Master, does it mean that we need to die and be born again to see or experience or enter the kingdom of God? Now, all these doubts will arise if we don't understand the meaning of the word birth. Now, whenever we talk about birth, we'll always visualize a child coming out from the womb of the mother. Well, birth means starting point of growth. Anything that is born is that which lives, and anything that lives is that which grows and expands. So when we talk about birth, it is starting point of growth. For instance, if there's a miscarriage in the womb, we don't say a child is born because the child does not grow thereon. So therefore, birth means starting point of growth. Now, we human beings are multidimensional. That means we need to identify various dimensions and we need to grow in those dimensions. Now, let's see what the dimensions are. Now, everybody has got a birthday. Now, birthday was recorded by the nurse, the doctor's parents, and every year you celebrate it as a birthday because you're born. And that is the birth or growth of one dimension, that is the physical dimension. And now you see, as the baby is born, it starts to grow and develop. And you will find somewhere at the age of 1.5 to 2 years, the baby always receives love from everybody. But there will come a time in that baby's life, around the 2 years or so, the baby will reciprocate mother's love. That means the baby has started to grow in another dimension, which is the emotional dimension. Now, this emotional dimension is also a tangible dimension like that of a physical dimension. Have you ever celebrated your emotional dimension birthday? No. The reason being, you're not aware of it. Just because you did not celebrate it, it does not mean there's no birth of the dimension. So from that moment onwards, you started to grow in the emotional dimension. Then you find the baby grows, and as the baby is growing, somewhere during the adolescence, the child will activate its intellect and will start to take decisions. Till such times, the adults, the parents, and the teachers were taking decisions for the child. But there'll come a time in the child's life, the child activates its intellect and start to take decision. That means it's a birth of yet another dimension, the intellectual dimension. Now, your intellectual dimension is also as tangible as your physical dimension. Do you ever celebrate your intellectual dimension? No, because you're not aware of it. Just because you're not aware of it, it does not mean it does not exist. The matter of fact is that we've got a physical dimension, we've got an emotional dimension, we've got an intellectual dimension, and we need to grow in these dimensions. Well, we are aware of these dimensions and we start to grow and do well. But there's yet another dimension, a catalytic dimension, a very, very important dimension, which we need to identify and start to grow in that dimension. And the moment you identify that important dimension and grow, then you'll use your body, emotions, and intellect rightly. Now, what is that dimension? A catalytic dimension. It is like, let's say, an architect designs a building with one main pillar and 3 supporting pillars. Now, the constructor who took up that activity of constructing dispenses that main pillar and constructs with the 3 supporting pillars. Now, what will happen to that building? That building will collapse. So similarly, human life is constantly and regularly collapsing because people are not aware of the dimension, or they do not know what it is, and therefore they don't concentrate and grow in that dimension. Now, what is that dimension? That is the spiritual dimension, and that is the essential dimension. The moment you can identify yourself with your spiritual dimension, you start to live a fuller life and you will use your body, emotion, and intellect well. So, therefore, identifying yourself with your spiritual dimension and growing in the dimension is very, very important. Now, we have religion. Whenever we talk spirituality, we are always connected to religion. But you must understand, religion is to help us to become spiritual. The purpose of religion is to help us to become spiritual. The word religion is taken from two Latin words, relegere, which means to unite. So the purpose of religion is to help us to unite with the source. That means identify ourselves with the spiritual dimension and unite with the spiritual dimension. And that is what is the purpose of religion. Now, there are many religions that is there. For instance, in this part of the world, in the eastern part of the world, the Indian side, there was a practice thousands of years ago which was called as Sanatana Dharma. It was called as Sanatana Dharma, meaning ancient religion or ancient principles. Because at that point in time, in this eastern region, there was no religion at all. But there was a practice. Since there was no religion, there was no name. But a name given to it is Sanatana Dharma, meaning ancient religion or ancient doctrine. So here, what are we talking about in Sanatana Dharma? There is a book which is called as the Vedas. Now the Veda means knowledge or insights or sacred teaching. So Veda was having this prescription for all the Sanatana Dharmis, which was called as Upanayanam. Now, Upanayanam is initiated to a person in the age of 12 or so after the intellectual dimension starts to grow. And Upanayanam is a means, a significance or a ritual to initiate the child into the spiritual dimension, and the child should grow in that spiritual dimension. That's the purpose of that ritual called Upanayanam. The moment the sacred thread is tied, that person is called as a Dija, meaning twice born or born again. So this connects with the biblical verse which says, except a man be born again, he cannot experience the kingdom of God. That means, except a man be born again, he or she cannot experience the spiritual dimension. So here we find Dija, meaning twice born or born again to experience spiritual dimension. So everyone was supposed to be wearing the sacred thread, including women. So this is a ritual given in Sanatana Dharma. And now we have Christianity. For Christian, the ritual is in the adolescence, beyond the age of 12 to 14, beyond that, the child is immersed in baptism, immersion baptism. That means the significance of immersion baptism is to tell the child that you are no more your body, mind, and intellect. You are a spiritual dimension, and that's the significance of immersion baptism. In Muslims, there is circumcision. The kalima is read, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and the circumcision is performed, indicating in the adolescence thereafter that the child needs to identify in the spiritual dimension and start to grow in the dimension. So even women were circumcised. So the significance of all this is to make the individual to realize that you have a spiritual dimension. Now for the Sikhs, there is the 5 Ks in the Khalsa. The initiation is done so that the person starts to grow in the spiritual dimension. That means every religion has got rituals or practices to make its people to understand the significance of the spiritual dimension and identifying the dimension, and one has to grow in that dimension. So therefore, religions are many, but the purpose of all religion is one, to help us to become spiritual. Each religion is like a different path, but the destination is one and the same. So therefore, instead of becoming religiously attached, instead of becoming religiously fanatic, because a person who sticks on to be religious will never become spiritual, because religion, the purpose is to help us to experience spirituality. So therefore, whatever religion you're practicing, or even if you're not practicing any religion, but any step that you do which helps you to unite with the source is a religion. And that is to help you to unite with the source and experience the spirituality, the vastness of spirituality, and not bound with the body, mind, and the intellect, but experience a spiritual dimension, the vastness and expanse of spiritual dimension, and live a life that is truly worth the human life. So it's very important for us to identify ourselves with the spiritual dimension and grow in order to live a totality of human experience.